The morning began the way most mornings did in our neighborhood. Quiet, controlled, almost obsessively neat. Lawns trimmed to regulation height, mailboxes identical down to the shade of paint, driveways free of a single fallen leaf. The HOA loved order. They worshipped it, and like all things taken too far, that devotion to order often came at the cost of humanity. My daughter, Lily, was already awake when I came downstairs. She always was. Losing her left leg below the knee at the age of 8 had changed many things in her life, but her determination to start each day on her own terms was not one of them. She sat at the kitchen table, concentrating as she adjusted the straps of her prosthetic leg with careful, practiced movements. Her brow was slightly furrowed, not in frustration, but in focus. She hated being rushed. She hated feeling like a burden even more. "Dad?" she said softly, without looking up. "Can you hand me the blue sock?" I slid it across the table to her and watched as she smiled. One of those small smiles that carried more strength than most people ever realized. Lily was 12 years old, disabled, and already tougher than many adults I'd met in my career. And I'd met plenty. Outside, the sun filtered through the perfectly aligned maple trees lining the street. Everything looked peaceful, respectable, safe. But I'd learned long ago that appearances meant nothing. Not on the streets. Not in neighborhoods like this. And certainly not where power went unchecked. We moved into this HOA-governed community 3 years earlier. On paper, it was ideal. Good schools, low crime, well-maintained properties. What the brochures didn't mention was the culture. How quickly rules turned into weapons when empathy was absent. I kept my job quiet. Not out of shame, but out of habit. Years in law enforcement had taught me that anonymity was often the safest armor. Here, I was just another single father with a disabled daughter. And most days, that was enough. That morning, Lily was excited. Her school was hosting an outdoor science fair, and she'd been selected to present her project. She'd spent weeks working on it. An adaptive device she designed herself to help kids with prosthetics balance better on uneven ground. Ironically, it was the HOA sidewalk cracks that had inspired it. Life had a strange sense of humor that way. "I want to walk today," she said as we stepped out onto the driveway. "No wheelchair. I've been practicing." I nodded, pride tightening my chest. "Your call, kiddo. I'm right here." We hadn't made it 10 steps before the white HOA utility cart rolled up beside us. I recognized the woman driving it immediately. Karen, her real name was Margaret, but no one used it, was the self-appointed enforcer of the neighborhood. She wasn't technically on the board, but she acted like she owned the place. Clipboard in hand, lips pursed, eyes already scanning for violations. "Excuse me," she said sharply, stepping out of the cart. "Sir, you can't block the sidewalk." I looked around, confused. Lily was standing directly beside me, her prosthetic foot resting carefully on the edge of the pavement. No one was blocked. No one else was even outside. "We're not blocking anything," I replied calmly. Karen's eyes flicked to Lily's leg, just for a second. But it was enough. I'd seen that look before. The kind that pretends to be concerned but is really discomfort wrapped in judgment. HOA rules state that sidewalks must remain completely unobstructed at all times, she said. And I've already warned you before about lingering, as if my daughter's careful steps were a deliberate act of defiance. "She's disabled," I said, my voice even controlled. "We're allowed reasonable accommodation under federal law." Karen sniffed. "This is private property. HOA rules supersede." "They don't supersede the law," I interrupted. Her jaw tightened. "I'll be reporting this." She climbed back into the cart and drove off without another word. Lily looked up at me, her eyes wide. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," I said immediately, kneeling beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong. Ever." She nodded, but I could tell the moment had already lodged itself somewhere deep. Moments like that always did. I dropped her off at school and went to work. Another day of meetings, briefings, reports. The weight of responsibility followed me everywhere, but I carried it the way I always had, quietly, steadily. Being police chief of the city wasn't something I talked about. It wasn't something I needed to. Authority only mattered when it was used right. And today, I had no idea how much I was going to need it. The call came just after lunch. "Sir," my assistant said cautiously over the phone, "your daughter's school called. She didn't show up for the science fair presentation." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean she didn't show?" "She left campus early. She was upset." I was already grabbing my jacket. When I pulled into the neighborhood, the HOA cart was parked in front of my house. Two men stood nearby, one holding a toolbox, the other gesturing impatiently. And on the ground, near the sidewalk, was Lily's prosthetic leg. Broken. The carbon fiber shaft was cracked clean through. The joint mechanism shattered. Useless. Lily sat on the front step, her face pale, her eyes red but dry. She wasn't crying. That scared me more than tears ever could. "What happened?" I asked, already knowing the answer in my bones. She swallowed. "They said my leg was a hazard, that it violated HOA safety rules because I took it off to rest. They tried to move it. I told them not to. I told them it was medical equipment." She pointed to Karen, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed. "She told them to remove it anyway." Karen met my eyes without a shred of regret. "It was left unattended on common property. That's a violation. We had no way of knowing it was delicate. Delicate. My daughter's ability to walk reduced to a nuisance. She can't walk without that," I said quietly. Karen shrugged. "Perhaps she shouldn't be leaving it outside then." Something in me went still. Years of training kicked in, not anger, not rage, but clarity. The kind that comes when a line has been crossed so completely that there is no longer any confusion about what must happen next. I took a deep breath and turned to Lily. "Go inside," I said gently. "I'll handle this." She hesitated. "Dad." "I've got you," I said. "I promise." As she disappeared into the house, I turned back to Karen and the men beside her. "You're going to want to listen very carefully to what I say next," I told them. They laughed. They had no idea who I was, and they had no idea how badly they'd misjudged the situation. The front door closed behind Lily with a quiet click, and in that small sound, something in me hardened. Not anger, not yet, but resolve. I had spent decades separating emotion from duty, teaching officers that justice demanded clarity, not impulse. But standing there on my own driveway, staring at my child's shattered prosthetic leg, I realized how fragile that separation truly was when dignity was stripped away so casually. Karen adjusted her clipboard, tapping her pen as if this were just another routine violation. The two maintenance men avoided eye contact now, suddenly less confident, as if the weight of what they'd done was beginning to register. The broken prosthetic lay between us, an unspoken accusation. "Who authorized this?" I asked calmly. Karen lifted her chin. "The HOA has the authority to remove hazards from common areas. Section 14B. Medical items left unattended." "That's enough," I said, holding up a hand. "I didn't ask for a recitation. I asked who authorized the removal of medical equipment belonging to a minor." She frowned. "I did. And again, we had no way of knowing." "She told you," I said. "She told you it was medical equipment. She told you not to touch it." Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. "Sir, your daughter has special needs, and we try to be accommodating, but rules exist for a reason. If we start making exceptions—" "This wasn't an exception," I said quietly. "It was discrimination." One of the men finally spoke, his voice uneasy. "Ma'am, she did say it was her leg." Karen shot him a glare. "That's not relevant." "It is," I replied. "It's very relevant." She scoffed. "Are you threatening legal action?" I looked at her for a long moment. "I'm documenting what happened." Her posture shifted. "You can't record HOA proceedings without." "I'm not recording," I said. "I'm remembering." That seemed to confuse her more than anger would have. I bent down and picked up the broken prosthetic. It was lighter than people expected. Most things that held lives together were. The crack ran straight through the load-bearing section, clean and unforgiving. This wasn't cosmetic damage. This was total loss. Do you have any idea how much this costs? I asked. Karen waved dismissively. Your insurance. It's not fully covered, I said. And even if it were, replacement takes weeks. Physical therapy adjustments, refitting, pain, setbacks. She shifted again. That's unfortunate, but unfortunate is spilling coffee, I said. This is harm. I turned to the maintenance men. You were following orders? They nodded quickly. Who gave them? I asked, though I already knew. Karen crossed her arms. I did. And if you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing to the board. I smiled then, not because it was funny, but because clarity had finally arrived. Oh, I will, I said. And so will others. She laughed. You think the board will side with you? We've cited your property 3 times this year alone. Grass length, driveway oil stain, unauthorized ramp modification. That last one hit harder than she intended. The ramp. I'd built it myself so Lily could move freely without feeling like she was asking permission to exist. The HOA had tried to fine us for it. Claimed it disrupted neighborhood aesthetics. We'd fought it quietly, legally. We'd won. Barely. That ramp is ADA compliant, I said. This is a private community, she replied smoothly. We have standards. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. Your standards just broke my daughter's leg. Her eyes flicked away for the first time. I suggest, I continued, that you leave my property. You can't tell me. I just did. She hesitated, then signaled the men back toward the cart. As they left, one of them glanced at me, shame written across his face. Karen didn't look back. When they were gone, I stood alone for a moment, the neighborhood eerily quiet again. The same trimmed lawns, the same polite silence. Only now it felt hostile. Inside, Lily sat on the couch, hugging a pillow to her chest. She tried to smile when she saw me. Am I in trouble? She asked softly. No, I said, sitting beside her. You're safe. She stared at the broken prosthetic in my hands. I told them, Dad. I really did. I know, I said. And you did exactly right. Her voice trembled despite her effort. What am I supposed to do now? I can't go to school like this. I swallowed. This was the part they never saw, the ripple effect of cruelty. Not just damage, but isolation. Missed moments. Confidence shaken. We'll figure it out, I said. Together. That night, after Lily fell asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Inside were copies of HOA correspondence, notices, warnings, thinly veiled threats, all carefully documented. I'd kept them not out of paranoia, but out of habit. Evidence mattered. I added a new entry: time, date, witnesses, description of incident, damage to medical equipment belonging to a minor, authorized by HOA representative. As I wrote, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. This is, sir. A nervous voice interrupted. This is Daniel. I'm on the HOA board. I leaned back in my chair. Yes, we heard about what happened today, he said quickly. And I want you to know, not all of us agreed with Karen's actions. Yet they happened, I replied. He sighed. She has a lot of influence. She's persuasive. She broke my daughter's prosthetic leg, I said. Influence isn't an excuse. I know, he said. That's why I'm calling. The board is meeting tomorrow night. Emergency session. We'd like you to attend. Is this about accountability? I asked. Or damage control? There was a pause. Both, he admitted. Good, I said. Because I'll be there. After I hung up, I walked into Lily's room and watched her sleep. Her prosthetic sock lay folded neatly on her nightstand, blue fabric catching the moonlight. She'd placed it there herself, like a promise she wasn't ready to give up on. I brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. They thought they could decide your worth, I whispered. They were wrong. The next day, word spread fast. Neighbors who'd barely spoken to us before suddenly stopped by with awkward apologies and whispered support. A mother across the street admitted, She'd been fined for her son's autism safety gate. An elderly veteran told me the HOA once threatened to remove his oxygen tank from the porch. Patterns emerged. Control disguised as order. Rules weaponized against the vulnerable. By the time evening came, I knew this wasn't just about Lily anymore. The HOA meeting was held in the community center. Bright lights, neutral walls. A long table where power sat comfortably. Karen was already there, flipping through papers, confident as ever. She looked up when I entered, and for the first time, I saw something flicker behind her eyes. Recognition, not of who I was, but of what she might have awakened. The community center smelled faintly of disinfectant and old carpet, the kind of place designed to feel neutral but somehow always lean toward intimidation. Folding chairs lined the walls, most of them empty for now. At the front, the HOA board sat behind a long table, nameplates neatly arranged, bottled water placed at identical angles. Order, control, presentation, all the things they valued most. Karen sat near the center, spine straight, hands folded, her expression carefully composed. She didn't look at me again after that first flicker of uncertainty. Instead, she whispered something to the man beside her, who nodded stiffly and avoided my eyes. I took a seat in the front row. Around me, neighbors filtered in more than usual. Word had spread. People who normally ignored HOA meetings suddenly found time. Some sat quietly, arms crossed. Others whispered to one another, glancing at me, then at Karen. There was a current in the room now. Unease. The board president, a silver-haired man named Harold, cleared his throat and tapped the microphone. This emergency session of the Oak Ridge Homeowners Association is now in order. He glanced at his notes. We're here to address an incident involving alleged damage to personal property and concerns about HOA enforcement procedures. Alleged. I didn't react. I didn't need to. Truth had a way of surviving careful wording. Harold continued. We'll begin by allowing the homeowner involved to speak. All eyes turned to me. I stood slowly, aware of every movement, every breath. Years of public briefings had taught me the power of stillness. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't rush. My name is Michael, I began. I live at 214 Willow Lane with my daughter, Lily. A murmur rippled through the room. She is 12 years old, I continued, and she is an amputee. Yesterday afternoon, while resting on our front step, her prosthetic leg was removed by HOA-directed maintenance personnel and damaged beyond repair. Karen shifted in her seat. This was not a misunderstanding, I said. My daughter informed them clearly that it was medical equipment. She asked them not to touch it. Despite this, they were instructed to remove it. I paused, letting that sink in. The result, I continued, is that my child cannot walk. She cannot attend school. She cannot participate in daily life without assistance. Not because of her disability, but because someone decided rules mattered more than her dignity. A woman in the second row wiped her eyes. Harold cleared his throat again. Thank you, Mr. Michael. The board takes these matters seriously. Miss Karen, would you like to respond? Karen stood, smoothing her blazer. First, let me say that the HOA regrets any distress caused. However, our actions were in accordance with established safety protocols. Items left unattended on common property pose a liability risk. My daughter is not an item, I said calmly. Karen ignored me. We were not informed, officially, that this object was essential medical equipment. That's a lie, someone said from the back of the room. All heads turned. It was the maintenance worker, the younger one. He stood near the wall, cap in his hands, face flushed. She told us. The girl. She said it was her leg. Karen spun toward him. You were instructed not to speak unless. I can't sit here, he said, voice shaking, and pretend that didn't happen. A hush fell over the room. Harold looked startled. Sir, are you saying? I'm saying we were told to remove it anyway, the man said. Miss Karen said rules were rules. Karen's face went pale. That is not. And she told us, the man continued, that if we didn't, we'd be written up. The room erupted into whispers. Harold raised his hands. Order. Order, please. Karen sat down slowly, her confidence cracking for the first time. I stepped forward again. This isn't an isolated incident. I reached into my folder and placed copies of HOA notices on the table. These are citations issued to my household over the past 3 years. Many relate directly to my daughter's disability accommodations. Karen shot me a warning look. Those were legitimate violations. Then explain this, I said, holding up one page. A fine for an unauthorized ramp modification. That ramp disrupted uniformity, she snapped. It provided access, I replied, which is protected by law. Harold looked uneasy now. Ms. Karen, did the board approve enforcement actions related to disability accommodations? She hesitated. I acted under discretionary authority. In other words, I said, you acted alone. A man in the audience stood. My wife uses a walker, he said. We were fined for leaving it on our porch. Another voice followed. They threatened to remove my son's sensory swing. An elderly woman spoke up, her voice trembling. They told me my oxygen tank was an eyesore. The room was no longer controlled. Harold's face drained of color. Ms. Karen, is this true? She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, she had no script. This HOA, I said, has created a pattern of discrimination under the guise of enforcement, and now it has caused direct harm. Karen laughed weakly. You're exaggerating. This is emotional manipulation. I met her eyes. You broke a child's leg. Silence. Harold swallowed. Mr. Michael, what are you asking for? I didn't hesitate. Accountability. Immediate coverage of replacement costs. A formal apology. And a full review of HOA enforcement practices related to disability accommodations. Karen scoffed. And if we refuse? I smiled. Not cruelly, not triumphantly, but with finality. Then this becomes a matter for the city, I said. She leaned forward. You don't have that kind of pull. I reached into my wallet and placed my badge on the table. Police chief. The room froze. Harold stared. A board member gasped. Karen's face drained completely of color. You never said, she whispered. I didn't need to, I replied. The law applies whether you know who I am or not. Harold stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned pending legal consultation. Karen didn't move. She couldn't. The power she'd wielded so comfortably had vanished in an instant. Not because of who I was, but because of what she'd done. As people filed out, neighbors stopped to thank me. Some apologized for staying silent. Others just nodded, eyes full of something like relief. I walked out into the night air, the weight on my chest lighter, but not gone. This wasn't over. Not for Lily, not for the others, and not for an HOA that had finally met the consequences of forgetting its humanity. The days following the emergency meeting felt strangely quiet, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. The manicured lawns were still there, the identical mailboxes, the silent rules etched into every corner. But something fundamental had shifted. Power, once invisible and unquestioned, had been exposed. And exposure changes things. The HOA's attorney contacted me the next morning. His tone was careful, professional, polished in the way people sound when they realize they're standing on unstable ground. We want to resolve this quickly, he said. You should, I replied. Within 48 hours, the HOA formally accepted responsibility for the damage to Lily's prosthetic leg. Not inconvenience. Not miscommunication. Damage. The language mattered. They agreed to cover the full cost of replacement, including expedited fabrication, physical therapy adjustments, and transportation assistance while Lily recovered mobility. But that wasn't enough. I requested written policy revisions, clear, enforceable protections for residents with disabilities, mandatory ADA compliance training for all board members, and the immediate suspension of discretionary enforcement authority that allowed individuals like Karen to act unchecked. They agreed to all of it. Karen resigned 3 days later. There was no dramatic announcement. No apology speech. Just a brief email sent to the community stating she was stepping down effective immediately. Some people celebrated quietly. Others said nothing at all. But no one defended her. Silence this time was an acknowledgement. Lily's new prosthetic arrived 2 weeks later. I was in the room when the technician fitted it, carefully adjusting the joint, checking alignment, making sure there was no discomfort. Lily was quiet at first, more reserved than usual. Trauma does that. It doesn't announce itself. It waits. "How does it feel?" the technician asked. She took a tentative step. Then another. "It feels strong," she said finally. I felt something loosen in my chest. The first time she walked down our street again, neighbors came out of their houses. Not to stare, not to judge, but to smile. One woman clapped softly. A man gave her a thumbs up. Lily straightened her shoulders, pride blooming where fear had once lived. But the real change wasn't in the neighborhood. It was in Lily. One night, as I tucked her in, she looked at me and asked, "Dad, was this my fault?" The question hit harder than anything Karen had ever said. "No," I answered immediately. "This happened because some people forgot that rules are supposed to protect, not hurt." She nodded slowly. "I was scared. But when you stood up, it made me feel like I mattered." "You always matter," I said, "even when I'm not there." She smiled at that. A real one. Unburdened. The city council requested a formal review of HOA practices across the district. What started as one incident uncovered dozens of complaints. Some years old, some quietly settled, others ignored entirely. Patterns emerged. Fines disproportionately issued against elderly residents. Disabled homeowners pressured into voluntary compliance. Families made to feel like problems instead of people. Policies changed. Not because I was police chief, but because the truth had finally been seen. At the next HOA election, turnout tripled. New board members were voted in: parents, veterans, caregivers, people who understood that community wasn't about uniformity, but respect. One of the first resolutions passed was simple and powerful. No rule shall be enforced in a way that diminishes human dignity. Lily insisted on attending the meeting. She walked to the podium on her own, prosthetic steady, chin lifted. "I don't want anyone else to feel like they don't belong here," she said into the microphone. "This is our home too." The room stood in applause. Later that night, as we walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, Lily squeezed my hand. "Dad," she said, "do you think they'll remember this?" I looked at the houses lining the street, at the ramps now visible on porches, at the walkers, the chairs, the quiet signs of accommodation that no longer felt hidden. "They will," I said, "because you taught them." She laughed softly. "I didn't mean to." "Most courage isn't planned," I replied. "It just shows up." Life didn't become perfect after that. It never does. But it became fairer. Kinder. And sometimes that's the victory that matters most. The HOA learned a lesson they'd forgotten somewhere along the way. A community is measured not by how neat it looks, but by how it treats its most vulnerable. And Lily? She learned something too, that her worth was never up for debate. Not now. Not ever.